Hello again, everyone, for round two with Javier.
Well, with everybody.
And everyone, yes,
we're,
of course.
we're all in the ring.
Christine is able to join us for the first time. Good, welcome. Where are you located?
Hi, I'm in Duncan on Vancouver Island.
Oh, a neighbor, practically, to us.
Yeah.
Great. There may be one or two more people, a few more people joining us. Not everybody is in every session live, so some of them are not able to attend, and then they look at the recordings, which I sent out. So Javier, go ahead, please.
Oh, I thought you were waiting for people.
Well, I was, but let's just go ahead.
Well, it's usually a small introduction so that people can easily miss it. So today we have Life is Relationship. That was the title. Generally, one way to see the development of Krishnamurti's teachings as he used to do it didactically in his talks is that he starts sort of from the world, as it were, the social, the external, but then brings it, like we were saying yesterday, home. He's moving it closer and closer and closer. And relationship is somehow the next step. From the world looks like it's out there. We said we are the world, but it looks like something out there with which we are in continuous discussion and dialogue. But when it comes to relationship, it's much more difficult to distance oneself. I get the feeling that Krishnamurti is just cornering the self. It's just sort of, I make my excuses. The people there are doing this. And then he says, all right, bring it home. How do you relate? And then he says, oh, it's me. So then I am at the center of the topic. Immediately, I cannot separate myself from relationship. I am in relationship. I am exposed in relationship. Relationship is what I do, where I exist. Now, these three words of the title for today of Life is Relationship. Three little words, easily written, typed on a screen, put on a paper, said in words. But I think sometimes I just have the feeling that they really do represent a great depth of understanding. And somehow even I feel my mind doesn't quite grasp the full extent of those three words. Life, I mean, do I even understand that one? Is relationship. And relationship, therefore, he brings it again. I am therefore not separate from life. I'm not separate from relationship. And he added, usually, nothing exists or can exist in isolation. No isolation, and yet that is what we experience. Somewhere there is already a dialectic, isn't it, in our life, between relationship, being in contact, knowing that our being as human beings is dependent on it, we're intrinsically rooted in relationship, shapes us and we shape it. There is this back and forth, the non-separateness of our own existence. And yet, what we experience oftentimes is precisely the isolation in which apparently we cannot exist. So right there I see, I don't know if you see it also, a challenge. If we are in relationship, we're not isolated. And we exist. But if the isolation, loneliness, creeps in, as it does so often, and we have to look at that, then do I exist? Is there life? I feel that is dramatic. Again, maybe that's the Spanish tendency to dramatize everything. But the sense of that is the tragedy of life. We're facing the tragedy of mankind, that either we are in a relationship we love, or we are not. The pursuit that we have this self-centered movement, which is inherently isolating. So we're going to go a little bit into that. That is one of the major issues that as human beings we naturally face. I think I'm talking fairly generally, but I think if we were to pause a little bit and look at our own lives and see the trail of relationship, we would see that in operation, of the love and the breakdown and the isolation. So what does it mean to relate? And if that is life, then what is our responsibility to that life? The quality of our relationship is the quality of our life. As simple as that? Or am I overextending it? Now, as you know, Krishnamurti used to sort of make a little breakdown of relationship by its objects. So he would say, mention typically 3 or 4 things, like relationship with nature, relationship with things, relationship with people, and relationship with ideas. Now that's already quite a panorama to look at, right? I think that pretty much relationship with nature, we can see where it's at. There's always been our struggle as biological entities. Somehow nature is our enemy. We've been fighting it. We're born from it. Is our mother. Is without it we would not exist. Look at it. Relationship. We bring bread by nature. What does nature in fact mean? It means that which nurtures, which gives birth to. Natura naturans is that which existing gives birth. We have been given birth by nature. That's our nature itself. I'm sorry about the language. It kind of wraps itself around itself. And sometimes you cannot make the right distinctions. But there we are. Nature as the ground of our very biological being. This monkey began millions of years ago as almost nothing. And yet slowly, through process of evolution, came to be this supposedly highly developed thinking being, capable of mastering nature itself. That's a major development. Did nature intend this? To create a creature that will master it? Of course, we don't master it, right? We are so confused and not so clear and intelligent about our relationship with nature that we're in the point of destroying it, and therefore destroying ourselves, because we won't be able to make it without it, right? The order of nature is so much vaster than our calculations of self-interest. Our own survival is working against us. So right there we have a big question over what's our relationship with nature. Evidently, somewhere we have missed the true order, the true harmony of it. At the same time, we cannot also underestimate the danger involved in being an organic entity. Look at what just happened. If you believe that we had COVID and that this was really a threat, a pandemic, and we had to fight it. Now there is another thing coming, the monkeypox. So what next? There is all kinds of, nature is also breeding all these things, apparently, whereby species can be wiped out. So we have to be careful here not to idealize that this fight is ongoing. At the same time that we have to really respect the ground of order from which all life comes and by which it is sustained, and not to undermine it. If we do, we shoot ourselves in the foot, not to say somewhere more dangerous, in the head and the heart. We don't feel, we don't think properly. So we're going counter to ourselves. The spirit again of self-contradiction in which mankind, through his confusion, seems to be caught. So this is a question that we have with ourselves. Right now it's becoming more urgent and the whole world is aware, more or less, of it. And yet we're struggling with what to do. Knowing what to do, we won't do it because other interests are overriding it. So there we are. I have to look at what our interests are, what our broader vision is, because you need a very broad vision to have a right relationship with nature. You need to feel that you are that you are responsible for sustaining life, not your own only, but everything else. And that nature is not there for our use and exploitation, which is how we have conceived it, even from a religious point of view. Right? You know the famous saying of God to people in the Garden of Eden, I give you this garden for you to, do whatever you want. Well, I'm afraid that was not a very good instruction to give if he did give it. He said, no, thou shalt respect all living beings because you are one of them and just as impermanent and fragile. I made you in my image, but images can be wiped out. Well, I'm putting myself in the place of God and I shouldn't. I don't know what God would say, but I think a modern God would say something different. Anyway, we made that move, right? To develop knowledge, that's the myth, in order to control the environment, but that knowledge itself gave us power. That power became our arrogance and our pride, and as you know from Greek tragedy, that brings down the wrath of the gods. So we are there again in the Greek tragedy. Watch it, this is coming. The seas are rising and the heat is on. So that's relationship with nature, to really respect it, he said, to really not just have ideas about it, but actually contact it. So if you read Krishnamurti, you see what a close contact he had with nature, how sensitive his descriptions of nature are, how he says, I disappeared. The self disappears. The disappearance of the self, for him, of course, as you know, is central in everywhere, but even in relation to nature. That's so beautiful, that the sensitivity itself and the fusion with the world as nature, as that which generates itself as life and existence, also requires the vanishment of the self, the ending of self-interest. Eventually he brings it all down to that, whether it is with people, with nature, with things, or with ideas. So bear that in mind. And what does my mean? Since we have to protect ourselves also. So we have to be a little selfish somewhere. That's the question. You say, I have to protect myself against this virus, against this lion, against this hyena, against what have we not to protect ourselves? And yet you must protect the lion against you. Look what we're doing, right? Killing lions for sport. That was one horrible development of history. You see it in the Mesopotamian kings. When you go to the museum, there you see them shooting the lion. And when you look at those bas reliefs, right, those carvings on stone, what is the beautiful thing there? Is the lion, is the horse, is the animal. And yet that beauty was insufficient to keep those kings from shooting those arrows. We override the real value of things as beauty, as the expression of creation for the sake of our power. When I go into the museums and if they have a Mesopotamian section, I get a bit of a panic because of that sense of power overriding the value and beauty of life. So power is a dangerous thing when it comes to relationship with nature. And yet we need to have it in order to protect ourselves from all kinds of things. So you see balance here, careful what we do with our power. And there I see it already from ancient times in terms of killing was the way to show your power, to demonstrate your greatness. And that was its own mistake. Right? So that's one thing. Things, relationship with things. We live in a world of things, right? This is a material world with matter. We are matter. We're also objects. We depend. We eat every day. We have bookshelves. full of knowledge. Matter even can hold knowledge. Look at that. And even beauty of some kind. So we live with objects, we need objects, we are moving matter. Look at this, what are we busy with most of our lives? And society is busy with moving matter, transforming matter from one place to the next. The industry, everything is a material, not everything. Most of it is a material process. Even information is a material process in terms of something that's stored in some material basis and then is transmitted through, again, energy or material waves. Well, if you call it matter, these waves, electromagnetic waves, that's not really quite, it's a bit shady there. But information is transmitted and held somewhere. Our brains, material. Thought, says Kay, is matter. Boy, what is not matter? A friend of mine used to make a joke. He said, what is matter? What is mind? Never matter. What is matter? Never mind. That doesn't matter, right? So, matter and mind. But Kay extends the field of materialism in a way, hard thing to say about him, in terms of bringing matter to the brain and to the movement of thought itself. The world of things is the world of thought for him. He calls that reality. So we live in reality, in the world of things. Reality based on the Latin res, meaning thing. So the word etymologically points to thing. Our relationship with things has also to do with thought. But watch, because we need things to support ourselves, to feel safe, food, clothes, shelter, and now we have other levels of necessity, like employment, like heavy, all kinds of industry or kinds of production. I was just in Amsterdam today, because I give the course on Krishnamurti live there on the weekends, and I was coming in the tram. Amsterdam has all these trams. So coming in the tram and just looking out at the streets, which is now beginning to be flooded with tourists. And what do you see? Shop after shop after shop. Cafe, restaurant, coffee shop, cafe, restaurant, this, that, the other. Things, the exchange of things, the pursuit of things, and the sensations that things provide. So what's our relationship with things? There is need and there is greed. That the sense of the more is also part and parcel of our relationship to thing, and that maybe that's a factor of distortion, that we find it hard to draw the line as to where it is enough. When do I have what I need and I can let go of the more? Or is the more a necessity of our endemic insecurity, our sense of impermanence? I seek security through my possessions, through having a bigger house, having more money, and so on, right? We seek security, which seems natural. But is this the way of security? The possession, the more. I once saw a little nature program. Nature teaches us a lot if we watch. And it was these cruel naturalists. I thought they did a cruel experiment on a seagull. Of all creatures, they made a big wooden egg, exactly the same as the seagull's egg, but larger and wooden, and put it next to the nest of the seagull. And the seagull abandoned her real egg and went for the bigger one. Now I thought, wait a minute, how far back does this sense of the more come from? Why would a seagull abandon her real egg where life is for a larger wooden egg that will never hatch? Is that what we're doing, metaphorically speaking? That the more, Krishnamurti used to say, the more is the enemy of the good. Because the good is what exactly fits the need. And the more is already an overextension, which necessitates going against the order of things, as in the seagull. That poor seagull, somehow is it inbuilt in the animal to want something larger, something bigger. I left that question has been hanging in my head, no? As to why we have this continuous drive for the more, which is the whole thing of progress, which is the whole thing of our Western civilization, which is now in jeopardy because of that very excess of desire, which is undermining is met by the limited resources of the planet itself, so that we cannot go on the more and the more and the more. So that has to be questioned. A relationship based on the more, on greed and not on need. And using things, why do we use things? Because we need them? Or because we want to become someone? Right? Things also have status attached. It has to do with my value as a person. We measure our values according to our possessions. So is that a measure of our worth? Money, status, and success have become, in our modern society, the measures of our worth. But is that the human worth? Or is that a transference to things and a value that things by themselves do not have? So there is a confusion of values in terms of what we are worth and what things are worth, and we equate them. Right? To have is to be. This famous equation that seems to be driving mankind to ever acquire more. They repeated this thing to me when I was a kid, and I couldn't understand it. I still can't. They said in Spanish, they say, tanto tienes, tanto vales. Your worth is as much as what you got, which is the same as English, right? To have is to be. They put it differently, but it's the same. Look how general it is. It is not peculiar to one culture only. And I bet you they say it like in different ways in different cultures. Maybe there are cultures that deny that equation, right? Maybe old Indian cultures in America and so on, they might not have had that idea that to possess is to be, and the value of your possessions is a measure of your worth. So again, relationship with things and what things mean to us becomes very important, because that's how we will use them. It depends on our values, right? Our relationship with people, boy, there we enter into, the other day I said to a friend of mine, because they were praising relationship and love and all that, and I said, don't you think it is a minefield? And they said, careful with that thought. Because if you think that, then that's what it becomes. So, oh, quite right. So I better watch it. Better not put labels, better not undermine it, better not dismiss it. So they gave me, were teaching me to be much more careful in the kind of statements I make, because that's an assumption, right? However, where was that coming from? That was coming from the experience of a series of relationships that went kaput. So you say, our life, the history of our of our life is littered with the ruins of love. I went poetic. And I say, oh, watch it again, because that's too negative, you see. We want to maintain the beauty of love, as we should perhaps, and yet when you try it and you love and it somehow turns into its opposite, how come? Until you become very skeptical, or some of us become skeptical at certain points, though not giving up on relationship, but not becoming cynical, right? Then you can become cynical. That's a danger. So watch it. But at the same time saying, well, there are serious issues here. Why is it that love, so beautiful in its beginning, so enfolding and warm, so free from any friction, so, it's like liberates you from your narrow little self, and you feel expanded, expansive, beauty is immediate, and you don't feel even your own old burdens of your preoccupations and personality glitches. It's like a balm of order and harmony and liberation, by all means. But apparently it only lasts 2 years, according to some calculations. So by the end of 2 years, the pink cloud begins to dissolve. And then what? Well, then the personality frictions begin to arise, then they start to make kind of adjustments. Then one personality tries to change the other, and end up in a kind of conflict. There is dependence, there is attachment, there is possession, there is friction, and all that, and it can easily degenerate into incompatibilities, frictions, conflicts, and more violence. So the love turns into its opposite. Krishnamurti says, love has no opposite. So, all right, but our experience would suggest that there is a kind of development from what we think love is, such that the opposite comes about. So how come is that? So when Kay looks at love, he says, let's look at what love is not. Maybe we made mistaken assumptions as to what love is, and that's why it was not love even in the beginning. Is that correct? Otherwise, the opposite would not result if there was truly love. So there's a big question mark hanging over personal relationship, intimate relationship, in terms of what love means. And how come it easily seems to, well, after a time, it takes some time for it to develop. So it's also time. Kay says time comes into it, into the fragmentation and breakdown of relationship, because we build images of each other. This is his diagnosis. Is it that simple? I asked myself. How come my relationship breaks down with my wife? Is it that I built an image about her and she built an image about me? And those images are not compatible? What is the image? The image is not, in the beginning maybe it was also an image. It was a positive image. But the image turns into negative after a time? Is it that the image simply shifts? That it was always an image? If there was no image, and that's the basis of love, because we relate as people directly, love of an image is not love of the person. Right? I have a friend of mine from Denmark, and we were discussing this issue of relationship. And it looked like he was very skeptical about even the possibility of relationship. And I said, well, what are you saying? Are you saying that you don't believe in relationship? It sounds to me like you don't believe in relationship. And he said, oh, no. I believe in relationship. What matters is that I don't believe in the other person. So what is it that we are in love with, you see? With ourselves, with a sensation, and the other person is just a means to an end. Something like that he was suggesting. So he was sort of taking it for granted. I don't think he was that skeptical, actually. Rasmus, my friend Rasmus, he wasn't that skeptical. But he had this feeling that there is a gap between what we are pursuing and the fact that we have a living person there and not a fiction, not a fantasy. Right? So the question of love and the real appreciation of another, the embracing of another as a whole. And I think Krishnamurti had another insight, which I valued very much and continue to value, dangerous as it is, but insightful also and helpful, that he said relationship is a mirror. Now, I said, oh, that's where we are exposed. Intimate relationship, perhaps even more than any other. We are naked, not just physically, but psychologically. Everything that we are manifests in there. And therefore, look at how beautiful, I find that very insightful and beautiful. I say dangerous also because we may be afraid to be exposed. So if we have that duality already in us, relationship will expose us. And we may not want to see. But if we don't want to see, then we cannot really have a relationship, because relationship is its nature to expose us. So the love has to go so far that I'm willing to be exposed. Not by the other, but to expose myself, as inevitably takes place in relationship. My aggression, my fear, my pain, my conditioning, my trauma, my ambition, my greed, my conniving, my lying, my whatnot is there. Think about it. I'm a liar, suppose. No, not really. But Suppose I'm a liar, and I'm a compulsive liar. I say, I love you. Well, when I discover that, I wonder if you really love me. Do you love me? We are a liar. So maybe you're in it for some gain. You see, we're in it for gains, right? And for all kinds of things, not in relationship. There's always a means to an end. But is relationship a means to an end? Is life a means to an end? Because relationship is life. If you take it to that depth of understanding, then you see that relationship is not a means to an end. It's its own end. And besides, it has the quality, the potential of serving as a mirror in which to see oneself. Therefore, an extraordinary aid to self-knowledge, which is the way of freedom and transformation for mankind. So we are somehow not, I'm going to use the word use, which is dangerous, not using relationship properly. I don't say use, maybe not understanding relationship properly. That it is a mirror, that it is exposing us, that we are exposed. And isn't that important? Because we don't know ourselves. And that ignorance is what's undermining the very order of our lives. And therefore relationship is like a school, is the school of life, in which my ignorance is exposed, my little habits, my contradictions, my what is not exposed. And do I want to see? If I want to see, then relationship also offers a potential deepening of self-understanding. And therefore, if it does offer that, and it offers a certain freedom, or the way of freedom in learning from those conditionings that undermine and divide and conflict and contradict and break up, then it offers a real opportunity for love. Love being that quality of total harmony with what one is and what the other is. This self-transforming quality of awareness, which knows no division. That's practically a definition of love. So, but we draw the boundaries. I will let you see at this much, but not that much. And there are, depending on how divided we are from within, and there we have it, that we are divided, most of us, right? That's why we said yesterday also Krishnamurti's notion of the individual, that it is divided, and therefore not an individual. But if we are divided from within, that means also we are in a contradiction already with ourselves. We have an image of ourselves that we present as acceptable, and an image of ourselves that is not even acceptable to us. Therefore, if we seek the acceptance of others, and we consider that that's the meaning of love, we are necessarily bound to be hiding something. We are dual. We act in a dual way. But relationship, what does it do? It exposes whatever we hide. There's no way to hide. Life, what is it? The truth will out. Relationship is the field in which truth wills out, itself out. But then I don't want to see it. So what do? Either I create another smoke screen, or I must destroy the relationship, so I'm not exposed. And I seek a relationship in which it will not go that far to expose me. We also seek relationships for convenience, in as much as it won't disturb us to the depth that we need to be disturbed. Well, we are already disturbed, that's what I'm saying. But it won't bring it out necessarily. It won't bring out my contradictions. Maybe I hook up with somebody who has the same contradictions, and we just come to a détente, a quality of an arrangement whereby we just manage it. We tolerate each other's peculiarities because they are the same, and we carry on. We have a goal in common, security, or this, or that, or pleasure, and then we carry on. But that loses the depth. My feeling is that if relationship is not taken as that mirror in which self-understanding can be deepened, then after those 2 years is likely to collapse. This is the way, I feel, perhaps to give relationship depth. Because then what does that mean? It means that we are together in a much deeper and wider enterprise of transformation, of wholeness. The love of romance has its place, has its beauty, its energy, sexually too, and all that, the companionship and all that. But there is a depth to relationship because it's like life wants to fulfill itself. Life wants to flower, and love may be the flower of love, of life and relationship. So that has to have depth, not this simple romantic sensual aspect only, the sentimental element, but a quality of deepening self-understanding, where wholeness can flower. If you like, love is the perfume of wholeness. And if we see that we are fragmented and our relationship exposes our fragmentation, our partiality, our narrow-mindedness, then it is important to bring that attention there because it is being exposed. Therefore, we have the chance to see. I find that beautiful. I find that Kate really did add another dimension to relationship that we don't generally consider. And I think that has the potential to give depth to relationship, to love. Now, life is relationship. Nothing exists in isolation. But here we have it. Krishnamurti used to describe a kind of vicious circle of conflict, of self-contradiction in terms of relationship itself. We are, for example, afraid of loneliness. What is loneliness? So the question of loneliness, I used to think, why does Krishnamurti talk about loneliness so much? It's a little fleeting feeling. Hits you once in a while. Maybe while you're at a party which you don't connect with anyone. Maybe when you're at home in the family when there's conflict and there's no way of bridging the gap. Maybe when just by yourself and you don't feel that you belong in the world. There's so many ways of feeling alone, of being alone in a crowd. It doesn't matter how much noise they make, you don't feel connected. Loneliness as this awareness of one's isolation, of one's lack of relationship. That's a tremendous thing. So loneliness itself is pointing to that fact of our lack of relationship. So that's when I began to think, so it is not a fleeting feeling only. It has depth to it. It is revealing something of the essence of the psychological structure. And therefore it's very important to pay attention to loneliness. But what happens when we feel alone? We are afraid. It feels like pain. It feels like we're about to be annulled. If you're alone, you're not connected, and you feel you are not about to not to exist. So intrinsic to the sense of loneliness is the sense that relationship is what supports you in your being. And when you're alone, you are nothing. So there you are. You see, without you, I'm nothing. Isn't that the song? I love you. Stay with me forever, because without you, I'm nothing. So the dependence to counter the nothingness, which maybe we fear to be. So if you are lonely, the general movement has tended to be to move away from it, to move away from this gap, this abyss that loneliness points to, the isolation, the nothingness of the self. So how we will go away from loneliness? By seeking relationship. So move away from the feeling of emptiness and the fear of that emptiness, of the negation of myself, and go to relationship. Then I become attached to this person because that person becomes very important to counter the feeling of pain and nothingness which is haunting me deep down. That very dependence, according to Krishnamurti, this is the kind of thing. I'm not saying it is true or not true. It's a description I think that he generally makes of a vicious circle in which we can get caught in relationship, which is loneliness, escape from loneliness. And Krishnamurti, as you know, was a tough master when it came to escapes. He said, no escape. We're all escape artists, but we are not managing to escape from anything. The more you escape, the more you remain in the same circuit of self-repeating contradiction. So careful with that. But this is what he describes, as I understand it. Loneliness, escape from loneliness, fear of the pain, escape from loneliness through relationship, so-called attachment, really. He calls it attachment. I have to hold on to someone or something. It's not only people, but also things, ideas. Ideas are very important here also. We feel lonely in terms of the universe itself, of not having any meaning, and therefore we want to give meaning to our lives by attaching ourselves to an idea. And we defend it with our lives also, because it's so important not to feel that anxiety in the face of not knowing. So, but take it to people, that attachment to people, that becomes possessiveness, dependence. He did not raise this thing, right, of depending on them and therefore not letting go, possessing, dominating, controlling. Therefore, the friction, because the other person is not just an object, is also a free human being, have their own tendencies, and therefore the friction, the jealousy, the conflict, and the breakdown of the relationship. Back to loneliness and back again. So where would you break this cycle? Right? I suppose at any point, right? At any point can be broken. It's all one turning wheel of misfortune. See, the wheel of misfortune. In terms of the relationship, right? I seek my happiness, but I'm actually escaping from myself. I used to wonder, you see, at one time I had this problem with myself, that I felt I was escaping from my loneliness by seeking relationship, through sexuality, companionship, the pleasure of it. Sharing a sunset with someone is so much more great than just watching the sunset by yourself. That sort of thing, you see? So the poetry of relationship comes in as a beautiful justification for this move. But I said, what is loneliness? And I didn't give Krishnamurti's answer to myself. I gave another answer, which was, this is important. See, Krishnamurti is posing questions for us to pose to ourselves. So I posed that question to myself. I said, what is my answer? And I felt that loneliness is the feeling that one cannot live with oneself. That's crazy, though. I said, what a crazy thing. We cannot live with ourselves? If we cannot live with ourselves, how can we live with another? So I challenged myself. And for 6 years I avoided relationship. Deliberately. There was a bit of a torture initially. But eventually I found that I could live with myself very happily. In fact, I was the happiest I had ever been. And I don't know why. To this day, I don't know why. But because I did not escape. So the sense of, if you want to find love, that's one suggestion. Face your loneliness. Face the loneliness is brought up by this movement of the self that is continuously self-isolating. That's where Krishnamurti brings it anyway. Self-isolating in his desires, in his usage of things, in his seeking his own fulfillment through any means whatsoever. But it's always self-isolating. It's always a self in the middle. It's always me. And when I hook onto another to satisfy that desire to escape from myself, I'm still me. I'm still in isolation. And in fact, isolating the other in significant ways. Okay, I used to say, we are separate becomers. Everybody's becoming themselves, fulfilling, reaching, achieving, satisfying. We're separate becomers in pleasure and fear. That's a huge indictment of the way we approach relationship and the gap that is there, right? He had also a joke one time, which I didn't initially understand. I think he had picked it up from somewhere. He said, when two egotists get married, what do you get? And he said, two egotists? Meaning, there's no marriage. Marriage means that you fuse, right? But the egotists cannot fuse. So when two egotists get married, it's still the same number. You don't get an egotist. You get two still. So I thought, that is the problem, isn't it? So the problem of separation, the problem of self-centeredness as undermining the very meaning of love is where he brings the fundamental question of relationship. And therefore, I will leave it there with a question. What is really a relationship? Therefore, what is required? What is the essence of it? And what's our approach to it? What's our feeling for it? Okay. Lots of questions or lots of descriptions and lots of problems. be free. I don't want to add to the burden of our, what I call it, the wheel of our misery or misfortune. So we can do that like yesterday. What you say, what you feel and what you think, and your own reflections. We share it like that. I thought that was nice yesterday.
If I can start, I thought that was, I want to thank you for that expansion of the description of relationship. I always thought relationship with people, but seeing that is relationship with nature and things and people and ideas. My question is, when you talked about relationship with people, and you were focusing basically on a special relationship with one person. I am married, been married for 40 years, have a relationship with my wife, but I also have 3 children, and you didn't, they're incredibly important relationships in my life, which I didn't choose, and I can't, I don't want to get out of it, but can you say a little bit more about relationships with siblings and children and parents, I guess, like relationships with other individuals that are not chosen relationships?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I did bring it down to one. I focused on the romantic thing, because there sort of the emotional involvement is more obvious. So in a way, it's just to illustrate the whole dynamic of attachment, right? It's easier to see, perhaps, because we all can readily trace that development in our lives from our experiences in intimate relationship. But look, relationship with people is much broader. I was looking at the watch over there, sometimes looking at the corner on the top right-hand corner of my computer, where the time is ticking. So I wanted to make it as simple as possible. So Darom is Dutch. That's why. But there are many more relationships. The relationship with our parents. Just imagine if we were to go into that. Whoa! I mean, what was it like, our family? The family. You see, Krishnamurti once said something very beautiful. I only saw it in notes, and I'm not sure how authentic those were. He said, the family is an opportunity to love. I thought that's wonderful, because it's relationship. And therefore is again a space where love, it's an opportunity for love. But what becomes of that love, if there ever was? People say, I love you, but actually the conduct, see, my father used to say, I love you, but I didn't see the love. What I saw was an angry old man who was always bullying me around. So do I do that to my children? What's my I have 2 children also. So I saw initially, for example, that old man that was my father coming through me. I said, what? We don't realize how our past conditions us. How we become our parents? By sheer imitation, unconscious imitation. I had to be quick to catch that past and dissolve it. Right? Valuation of things, for example. If a child breaks a cup, that is my favorite cup, I shouted. And then I realized I was shocking this child. So what's more important, the cup or the child? The child. You're breaking the child because you broke a cup. You see, I could kick myself for being so slow. You had to be quicker. You had to see how this conditioning, the misvaluing of things. So I stopped. I said, they could break whatever they wanted. Because my concern was not to break the child. We are so delicate, right? So do we love our children? Krishnamurti used to say this. some radical things, as he usually did. He says, if parents love their children, there will be no war.
Mhm.
Aha, look at it. But of course, right, psychology has described all kinds of potential problems in the family itself in terms of all kinds of psychological glitches from our conditioning and so on. But the love, comes always to this. Do we love our children? And what does it mean to love our children? Is there that love? And what does it mean? Therefore, not to condition them, not to project an image, that the children don't exist to fulfill me. I project on them my failures so that they will succeed where I failed. That sort of thing. My father did that with me. He wanted me to succeed because he had failed. But that's a wrong thing. You use your child to get your own self propped up a little bit higher than what it actually was, right? You compensate for your own failures. And then you don't love that child. You only love that child if they fulfill your own self-projection. So you see, look, we have to watch it very carefully, that we are projecting on our children our own selves. They become extensions. So not to do that. That the child is something, I end up thinking every child is something sacred. It's like a gift of life itself. They are the reincarnation of life. And how do we go with life? What's our relationship, therefore? Is there the quality of care, attention, consideration, listening? Do we even listen to our children? It's a tremendous, beautiful thing. And the children teach us a lot, don't they? Like they taught me. I say, hey, Papa, you're being aggressive there. For what? I say, oh, wake up. So they woke me up in many ways, so I can drop this past conditioning that was coming through my background, a background that was itself blind to the actuality of the relationship. So to be really alive and to see them as they are, to let them support them in their qualities, that they have their own strength, their sensitivity, not to undermine them, not to control them, not to condition them in this misguided way. Can one do that? Isn't that part of love? Isn't that our responsibility? If I make a mistake, I make sure to acknowledge it. I do not deny my stupidity. If they show me my stupidity, I say that was stupid. Mm-hmm. I'm very sorry. Why? Because otherwise you revert to authority. No authority. Right? Even no authority. Being a father is like the certification, the stamp of authority. No. As soon as you appeal to authority, you are destroying the sensitivity of the child itself. So I say no. See how much we have to let go and deny in terms of what we supposedly, the role of the parent is, the idea of what it means to be a parent. For me, it is that we are all human beings, all of us. And the generation gap for me does not exist, because we are all human beings from beginning to end. We are in a long-distance race to transform ourselves, and therefore all respect is due to the next, the next in the race. You are handing them the baton, and you have to do it kindly. They have to feel strengthened in their qualities, in their perception, their intelligence, and their love. And that is integrity. That's my point. If as parents we can do that, boy, we may have some good runners. It's my way of poetically depicting it. But look, I'm not going into it. It's much more complex. You asked about siblings, and you know how difficult that is. Mm-hmm. Even my two kids that I brought up a little bit, I attempted to bring up this way. When they come together, sometimes they have these clashes. And I had never understood why they have them. So my daughter is quite strong character, and she has this brain, and her little brother, she sort of pounds on him quite a bit. So I said, hey, what's happening? Don't you realize that if a person grows up being negated by someone else, that can create a very difficult complex to overcome. So we mustn't do this, because you see the harm that is being done. But boy, there's some compulsion there to just overmaster this boy, the little brother. So, all right, there you have it. And what do you do? But try to hold a mirror to this and to say, look, We are not here to hurt one another if we can. Can we watch ourselves, see why we do what we do? If we cannot see it, then all right, we had to have patience. I realized they'd been teaching me patience also, because they said, Papa, don't intervene, don't interfere. This is our thing. I said, all right. So I was quiet for a long time, just trying to listen. And actually, listening is a great healer also, helps to heal. It was helping them to pay attention to themselves because they felt they were listened to with no interference. It is, this is all an art. It's all calls for a creativity at every point. I was wanting, to stop it, to create some kind of even procedure as to how you talk to each other, right? In harmony and peace. I've studied dialogue, David Bone's proposal. I know a few things. Well, no, when it comes down to it, there is only listening possible. And that I did. And I noticed once that peace came by itself. When the self is not there, when you're not interfering, imposing, condemning, judging, that also helps. And that's difficult, but a beautiful art. If we can do that with our children, and if the children learn that has its own action, right? The non-self notion. If the self is gone, where is the problem? All right, well, sorry, I talked a little much because we have to share. But you see, that it is a beautiful question, yours, and you can see how subtle and broad it becomes straight away.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Well, it seems to me that a lot of it comes down to this issue of images. You were talking about images, and in my meditation and so on, that seems to be the essence of this issue, this problem of relationship. Because as long as I think that there's two of us, there's me and there's the other, then there's bound to be conflict, right? As Krishnamurti says, division produces conflict. Conflict is inevitable when there's division. So if I have an image of myself and I have an image of my child, then there's two of us. There's separation, and there's always going to be conflict. So I think that's a really essential aspect of all of this to be looking at.
Because you have what a challenging thing not to have an image of yourself or of another.
Yeah,
it's
a big challenge for sure. I guess it's a question of observing when the images arise, to see that they really aren't true, that's not, that image of my child is not my child, as you were saying before. The living human being is you can't pin it down, pin that person down as this or that. It's always in movement. And
see, my son, when he was little, he saw a picture of myself when I was little, and he said, Papa, why didn't you tell me that I was you? Because it looks like the spitting image of myself. Now, that was very funny. I said, oh, there we are. But at the same time, I had the feeling, yes, you see, in the photos, he just is like myself when I was young and so on. He looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
And so, the biology it keeps making self-portraits. But then, of course, eventually it shifts quite a lot. But it is a kind of self-portrait going down the line. So I think that also lends itself to confusion, because then you identify with your son, right? He's me, and he identifies with you. Because he says, Papa, why didn't you say I was you? I thought that was very innocent, no? But look what it is. But in a way also, if we take it in a deeper sense of, yes, we are each other. In the universal sense of sharing in the same stream of humanity, then that becomes a beautiful and respectful thing. To not particularize it so much, however particular it is, this face and his face, and I don't know, he's happy with it, with his face, so that's all right, because he's got also his mother's, part of his mother, the Dutch element coming into the picture as well. So he's happy with his face, he's a handsome boy. But it's the sense of the universality that underlies that. That no matter who we are, what name we got, whose parents we got, we are in the same stream of humanity, universally. That was one of my things as a kid also. I said, why are they insisting that I am this, that, and the other? That I must particularize myself, identify with this particular culture, this particular race, this particular group, this particular language, this particular region, this particular. Whereas, as a human being, I feel I'm universal per se. That was my sense of freedom. My call for freedom had a lot to do with that. The reductionism of the person to the particular, to the circumstantial, to the historical, to the traditional. Whereas as human beings, I think we have already intrinsically the intuition, let me call it that, the sense that we are universal, and therefore not to be confined within those limited particular identities. That was my thing. I said, I am not just this. I don't speak just this language, and I don't have to think even these thoughts. Right? What thoughts do we think? Are they particular? Right? The stream of consciousness. And is there even something beyond the stream of consciousness? You see, the stream of consciousness, universal as it is still confined and limited. So the call for freedom goes even challenges that stream of thought itself. That's where Kay takes it. I find that extraordinary, that we could even go that far in questioning the intrinsic or apparently inherent limitation of the movement of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And even Kay goes very far in saying, in the space, I was reading it this morning with the people in Amsterdam, in the space that thought creates around itself, there is no love. So he even says, with the movement of thought, denies love. Does it? I mean, it boggles my mind, but it appeals to my heart that love goes beyond thought. Maybe because it denies the particularity, it denies the concept, it denies time. What does it not deny? Love. Maybe it doesn't deny being, right? Doesn't deny relationship. Is the essence, the perfume of wholeness, as I tend to say. So, you see, look how far we have to go into our sense of ourselves as human beings in terms of the question of freedom. Now, if you recall, another little detail that I think you might find interesting, just per se, is that Krishnamurti was always saying that love is freedom, and freedom is love. But then David Bohm, who used to look a lot at the dictionary and the etymology of words, looked up the word freedom in the dictionary, Oxford English Dictionary. And very interestingly, in the Oxford English Dictionary, says that the word freedom is connected to the Indo-European root, pri, similar to priyam in Sanskrit, which means love. The essence of freedom is love. The dictionary knew it before Krishnamurti discovered it. I thought that was really ironic. Look at it. There was a wisdom maybe in the back of mankind already, that they understood somewhere a connection between love and freedom. I said, what a repository of wisdom is the Oxford English Dictionary? I mean, of course it isn't, but right in the deeper sense of, and then Krishnamurti started using it like this, saying, referring to the etymological meaning of the word freedom, whereas he had found it himself, by himself, in his own journey of liberation, that liberation is love. The essence of liberation is love, because its wholeness is the ending of the particularity that confines, limits, and divides. So that is, what a journey. I mean, how far you have to go, right? The image.
The ways we separate ourselves go very deep.
But maybe it's also superficial, like you were saying, no? The image. How deep is the image? This is the question, huh? Isn't it? If the image is what separates,
Pretty
how
deep.
deep? All right. That's a question, no? Are we even aware? Sometimes I used to ask myself, okay, I understand Krishnamurti says this, that what divides is an image, and the first image is my self-image. Am I aware of my self-image? And I wasn't quite sure. Is what I think of myself, but am I even conscious, right? That we were saying about depth. Is it not a lot of it unconscious? And I discovered that indeed there is a lot of unconscious in terms of the build-up of the personality. So it's not an image in the sense of on the surface of the water, a reflection just in a mirror, but actually it has a depth in the memory of consciousness, a depth of memory from childhood and God knows from where else, right? What happened to me as a child has gone into building an image, meaning a concept of myself, of which I'm not aware. I'm not conscious. Hurts that are really at the back of my mind, in the unconscious. A lot of the personality is built around hurt. That's my feeling. I put it forward as a question because I think that is a universal, pretty universal phenomenon. That hurt is one of the nucleuses of the personality. You can almost guarantee it. If we look at each of us and if we look at ourselves, there is a hurt, as it were, at the back of our minds. But that hurt is not perceived as being active. It's already constituted itself into an entity. It took me years to become aware of the fact that I was operating on the basis of the bullying I experienced as a child, the trauma that created, and the self-pity that became the nucleus of my personality. Look at that. I wasn't aware of it. It took years of peaceful meditation for that to surface. So in order, this is what we're talking about, right? The depth. How deep does it go, right? Because to say image sounds very superficial, but actually it's the question of the mind and how it builds its personality on the basis of experience, and that has depth to it. It has an unconscious dimension, and it constitutes, and we have to go there. Therefore, that's why Krishnamurti often talked about, to understand ourselves, we have to be able to go into the deeper layers of consciousness. And for that, we have to try and bring order to the upper surface layer, so that that piece of the upper layer allows the deeper layers to emerge. And that's necessary for freedom from this conditioning of those deeper unconscious concepts, layers, images. The image of myself as a wounded person. And I go through life like this for the rest of my days, pitying myself. See, the past stays. The past is me. And it won't be free until that is perceived as such and that is no longer relevant. But we have to embrace it. We have to be one with it and allow it to, Krishnamurti used to use the word flower. The flowering of my sorrow is a tremendous, beautiful thing. But it's a flower most of us don't want in our garden. But without it, I think also the depth of, we miss on the depth of beauty. Huh? Beauty and love, Krishnamurti used to put together. And I think that's true also. He says so many true things that it's impossible to keep track. Guru Krishnamurti. But beauty, that if we are trapped, or not trapped, we are bound, identified psychologically, not consciously, but unconsciously with sorrow, then we miss out on beauty. And on love. How are we going to love if my approach to relationship is self-pity? I cannot give myself. And I'm always wary of hurt, because it's hurt at the center. To be free from hurt was one of the things that also Kay talked about. And that's why I think, because freedom from that is important for, it's a healing. It's the healing process, the wholeness that is required, without which there is no love. According to him. Let me not be dogmatic. We're trying to find out. So
Well,
that,
for me, fear was always a central factor as well. You know, I by even the age of 7 or 8 years old, I was had very deep fears. And of course, they were unconscious, like you say. I didn't know what they were about, but later in life, I, you know, began to look at those fears and try to understand what they were about, which nobody ever talked about except Krishnamurti when I came across his books.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, some other people talked about it, but I never came across them until before Krishnamurti.
yeah,
So,
see, exactly. We don't talk about so many things that are actually critically important in our lives. Huh?
Yeah.
That's our own self-education. We have to help each other also to talk about that which is really essential in our lives and which, as a culture, as society, we systematically ignore. We just have to be dutiful citizens and productive citizens and citizens.
Yeah.
Well, there's a human being behind the citizen, and that goes much further. And as Krishnamurti used to say, the inner, careful, when the outer can be as organized as you like, but the neglect of the inner is a danger to the order that we establish outwardly, because the inward always overcomes the outer. Look at it, he has a warning for society. That's why you and I have to look at our fears, huh? And our hurts, because that's going to mess up our lives, our relationships. We be good citizens. we do our job. We are fairly responsible. We don't cheat on our taxes. We treat people fairly and so on, and more or less we earn our bread. Good. And so what? We're still afraid, right? And that conditions us in all kinds of ways, distorts our own being and relationship, undermines the wholeness of life. And therefore, when you walk of an evening, you don't breathe the perfume of love. So look, yeah, you see what you're saying. I mean, I'm just expanding on what you were saying, and maybe I shouldn't do that. That is, just leave it at that, no? Of the things that are so fundamental to us, like fear and hurt, and we don't even hear talk of it until we come, and yet that's what shapes us as human beings, what molds us. Fear and hurt shape us.
So this morning before the meeting, I do couples counseling. Speaking of relationships, it's kind of interesting.
Oh.
That's what I do. And I was talking to a woman and her husband, and they were talking about all the different problems they were having with their 3 children, young children. And I said, it came about that it was, what's important? What's the most important thing to them? And they said, well, to love our kids. To love them. Okay, so how do you get to that? And then we talked for a while, and it was sort of like, it made me think of Krishnamurti and the way he approached it, because it was basically to get rid of or to become aware of all the things that weren't love. And okay, if you're doing that thing that's not love, ask yourself again, what's most important? Revisit, well, to love. Okay, so if that's not love, then is there a way to stop doing that not love stuff? And then it was interesting because they said, it's never come up. People don't ask, you don't ask what's the most important thing. And for them to set their intention, I may not know what love is exactly or how to get to it, but I can tell that's not love.
Yeah.
And the other part was then to be kind to yourself when you find yourself doing that kind of thing, because as soon as you find yourself doing the not love stuff, you get sad or upset with yourself for being, not loving. And then that's like you're doing the same thing to yourself that you're doing to your kids. So anyway, this has been a very interesting discussion.
But we should have brought you in right away to give us all that. You see, with so much to share, you see. Yeah. Mm.
Sometimes when I pay really close attention to myself in relationships, sort of like a moment by moment awareness, it becomes really apparent to me that there's nothing I perceive about the other person or the interaction that I don't have an opinion about, or that, like, it all has to go through my mind. And so it all has to mean something to me that it is invested in the story. And then there's no response that isn't anything but a manipulation to make the story better or more permanent or more secure or improve myself, sort of thing. And because there's no access except through the mind and my own narrative of what my experience is, it makes me wonder if there's ever a way of escaping that aspect of it, or if they have to sort of coexist.
You mean the bringing of all these opinions
Mm-hmm.
versus appreciating just the situation for itself?
It makes me wonder, is it possible to be in relationship and not have those things happening?
Mm. But the relationship is also exposing us. Our opinions are ourselves. So it would be interesting to just pay attention to the opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And why does one have these opinions?
Well, that I see. I mean, to make myself feel better, more secure, have control, get an outcome that I want, that sort of thing. So like you see the violence of it, experience that it's almost a mini battle going on all the time, but it's just a narrative, what I think is happening in my head. It's very hard to have, not hard, it's not hard, ironically, to have a presence that escapes that instead of feeding it. It's almost like a vacuum, like everything gets sucked into that space sometimes, all the time.
But it's also a defense.
Mm-hmm.
One is trying to protect oneself by controlling the situation.
Mm-hmm. So is there ever any letting go of control, or do you just abide in awareness of the...
Become aware of one's fear again. Fear of hurt.
Mm-hmm.
My space has been invaded too often. Myself has been the object of other people's manipulations. I'm on the defensive. I'm not saying that that's what happens to you, but that there is also this, right? The experience of betrayal, of hurt, of that people are manipulating one another because we all want something from each other. So that, for example, why am I approaching relationship always, or not always, but most of the time, is seemingly the motivation, to look at the motivation. That for me has been an interesting question, to pay attention to what's my motivation. We don't pay very much attention to that. What's the motivation for a relationship? If it has a motive, it already has a direction. It already is missing the whole. Therefore, it's not fully open to the other person because he has an object in mind. What would happen if I don't have an object in mind? You see, that's why we don't approach relationship innocently.
Mm-hmm. It's always a battle.
It's a motivation of me versus you. You become an object to me, and I become an object to you. Whereas I to myself am not an object, but a subject. And you to yourself are a subject and not an object. So we are subject, object, object, subject battling each other. Just like we do internally. We also turn ourselves into objects of ourselves. The controller from within. I heard Krishnamurti say this morning in one of the videos we were watching, can you live without control? Because the controller is the controlled. I'm not sure I understand that deeply, but there is something that rings true. The controller is the controlled. What I'm trying to control in the other is myself, because I'm controlling myself also. Why are we controlling ourselves? Why is there already this structure of power inwardly, which we then exert and project on relationship? Right? You can see this often in people. The people who have the most need to control others are the ones who are most in battle with themselves. Therefore, to become aware of one's own internal battle is essential if one is going to love, because then relationship is always a struggle. That's why the inner wholeness of psychologically, of heart, mind, and senses is primary in order to understand relationship. We didn't talk about that at all, about the internal relationship of the different aspects of our being, of our relationship with ourselves. That's very important. If we are in a contradiction with ourselves, and there's the structure of power already in consciousness of one part trying to dominate another, then we will have that also in relationship. We'll try to control in the other what we're trying to control in ourselves. And that control never works anyway. We're out of control. So control is the very sign of disorder. It sounds extreme, but I think it's a very beautiful thing to bring out, that Krishnamurti brings out. So, to understand this structure of control, and that it is itself a source of disorder, and can we see through it, and therefore dissolve it, so that there is no disorder and no control. Dangerous proposition. Krishnamurti used to say, careful, I'm not advising anarchy here. On the contrary, this is order, right? Unless you understand anarchy, he said, I thought Krishnamurti was an anarchist. Because he used to say, in the true meaning of the word, anarche, no authority. So no control. See, so experiment. This is for us to experiment with, because this is the entrenched pattern of our consciousness. How we've been trained, how we've been conditioned to division. You see, already look at it. We are aware of that. The conditioning is to divide us from ourselves. That is the source of the whole problem. Therefore, we are the problem. In that, the division is already within, and that will manifest outside. So two divided people meet each other. What's going to happen? I'm at war with myself. You're at war with yourself. Now, I'm not sure that peace can result from those two negatives. The sum of two negatives may not be a positive, right? Like the Spanish philosopher José Ortega y Gasset used to say, love is an exchange of lonelinesses. I give you my loneliness, you give me yours. And therefore, we are rid of loneliness? No, I got yours and you got mine. It's still going on. Actually, I never got rid of mine, right? I just covered it up by giving it some companionship. So we look at it together as human beings, how aware we have to be, not to disguise the real content of our consciousness, and to face the division, to face the fragmentation together. Is that possible? You see, to have the respect for one another, of understanding that this is the general condition of mankind.
Mhm.
And therefore, love coming also in there, that I therefore is actually more like compassion, right? That we're both suffering due to that very structure of fragmentation. And if I'm aware of my suffering, won't I be aware of yours? And will that maybe not help to some extent to bring us together and maybe generate even the energy that may transcend that duality? I don't know. Compassion for Krishnamurti was tremendously significant, but it meant going precisely in the sorrow, in the pain and the suffering, so that it is released. So not separating ourselves from the suffering. See, it's all about joining, not separating, and letting the energy that is trapped in separation to bloom. The energy of sorrow, he said, when you go there and is released, is compassion. And compassion is passion, and passion is beauty. Again, beauty. He brought beauty everywhere. But that's why he was able to go there to these deeper structures of conditioning that are divided and release that energy by not separating himself from it. It's a beautiful proposal. Not so easy to do, by the way. Words are easy to use, relatively. But the actual, to face that thing of how divided am I? That's my pain. Then I bring the control to try and create order, but that's part of the disorder. And then I bring that to my relationships, and that's why my relationships also don't work. Because there's no real love in me, no real unity, no real wholeness. And therefore I don't bring wholeness into relationship either. Right? I bring my division, the duality. So look at it. This is for everybody. This is universal. As far as I know, very few are really ever free totally from it. So let's not pretend to any ideal, but we know where the problem lies, and the kind of friends of mine say you have to have some courage. Well, I don't know, what do you call it? The daring to say, look, if you have a pain and you go to the doctor says it's going to hurt a little, to heal you from this other pain. So maybe we have to go to the pain and endure it, not avoid it, because meeting pain is part of the healing process. The pain is there to pointing out to us, isn't it, that we are suffering. So to face the suffering means meeting the pain. And the pain has its own potential liberation of energy. We don't separate ourselves from it. The separation keeps the pain going.
The repression,
Repression, the avoidance, the escape. So imagine saying to your boyfriend or girlfriend, saying, look, we're going to suffer together today. No, I'm not proposing that you do that kind of drastic experiment, because it is part of love. Just like we share laughter and pleasure, we share tears and sorrow. Part of the communion of being human, with intent to see, right? This is also part of us.
So perhaps we need to bring our session to a close. It's a powerful theme, and it was a wonderful session, I think. If you have any questions that you would like to perhaps that you weren't able to ask now, or comments that you have in mind, please feel free to forward them to me and to send them to me, and I will forward them to Javier. He's kindly agreed to then address these any comments or questions that you may have in tomorrow's session. So
because there's never enough space, you can see we could have gone on. So there's never enough time. I say, so therefore if something really important is left over, just go ahead and feel free to share that.
So we'll see you tomorrow then.
Yeah. See you. Right.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Bye, everybody.